Good day and greetings from Pretoria, South Africa. My name is Dr. Charles Cotter. I'm the Learning Navigator, the Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program, part of the e-learning series. This is an on-demand learning program and comprises of 6 modules. Each of the registered learners will receive a SlideShare presentation per module, and then also a detailed workbook which comprises the content, but also a series of learning activities, which I'll expect you to complete at the end of each of these modules. I think this is probably the best way of continuing the engagement and also to stimulate discussion between the Learning Navigator and the registered learners. As a form of introduction, I'd like to give you a quick overview of my professional pedigree. Essentially, I've been in the field of education, training, and development for the last 19 years. Of those 19, 15 as an independent contractor. I've been very privileged to have worked for over 140 different companies, both in the public and private sector. And of course, this stretches across 18 different countries and 4 different continents. My area of subject matter expertise is strategic management, change management, and also strategic human resources management. Let's continue with outcome 2 of module 1. To give you an overview of what lies ahead, I'd like us to initially just to look at some of the research findings, the global research conducted by ProSci in terms of the success factors of effective change management. And I think the bad news for a lot of change managers is that according to the ProSci research, is that 70% of change management programs tend to fail or tend to be ineffective or do not achieve the change outcomes and objectives that they set out to achieve. So we're going to look at that, some of the critical success factors, and of course, the highlight of outcome 2 of module 1 is to navigate through the 10 best practice criteria of change-ready organizations. So I want us to look at that, and I want us to look at the gap analysis. So of the 10 factors, I want us to measure the state of readiness and of course identify maybe 3 of the 10 gaps. And I'd like you to share what those gaps are. And of course, the million-dollar question is, how do we employ strategies on how to close those gaps? So as I mentioned, it's very clear that based on the ProSci research that 70% of their change management programs, this is globally, tend to fail. And when we start unpacking the research intelligence, it's very clear that only 20% of these respondents considered the change to be successful and to be meaningful, etc. An alarming 70% of the respondents state that not enough focus is placed on managing change in critical projects. That's very concerning. Only 40% of the respondents believe that they have the right skills. So I think one of the critical success factors is, of course, future fit skills and making sure that we have the right competencies. And later on in this module, we're going to look at the different change models. And the one that I particularly enjoy is the model by Nosta. And I think it's very clear that they amplify the importance of having the right skills at the right time, in the right place, on the right change management projects. If you don't do that, then of course it's sometimes the conspiring force that leads to failure of change management programs. And then only 49% of organizations hold their leaders accountable. So I think this is very important towards the latter end of this particular module, but in particular when we get to module 2, you see we're going to spend a lot of time looking at the roles and responsibilities and the contribution of change leaders. And I think it's very clear that we need to hold our change leaders more accountable, and change leaders in particular, like we've said, need to be more transformational and less transactional. Another study that was done by the Project Management Institute, the PMI, this dates back to 2012, suggests that organizations that report being highly effective at change management are 117% more likely than less effective organizations to report success with new initiatives. So, I mean, that is a staggering statistic, 117% more likely. So whether we refer to the PMI research or the ProSci research, I think it's very clear that I think the impact of change might be underestimated, and the principles and the practices certainly need to be significantly improved upon to increase the 30% success rate that global change management projects are currently going through. So this is based on the work of ProSci, and what they've done is they've initially looked at the challenges. Now remember the hierarchy that I shared earlier on. It starts with a challenge, and then of course challenge becomes change, where we need to shake things up, and ultimately that leads to disruption. So what are these changes? And it's quite interesting. Right at the top of the list, 44% is corporate culture. I think it's very clear that culture is the #1 challenge for implementing change right now. Also measured at 44% is a shortage of resources. Now you'll see the legend for this particular graphic. It's very significant in that it differentiates between hard factors, so that's the darker purple, and also the cerise pink, which is then the soft factor. So corporate culture is regarded as a soft factor, and then the shortage and deficiency of resources, for example, financial and also human and material resources, that is then regarded as a hard factor. And as you work through this, complexity, we spoke about the VUCA acronym. So the volatility, the uncertainty, the complexity. And I think I alluded to this point a few minutes back, that sometimes we underestimate the complexity of change. One of the hard factors, which is a significant challenge, #4, according to the ProSci research, of course, is the change of processes. So I think processes sometimes difficult to unbundle, sometimes difficult to reconfigure, and that's rated at 36%. And then also the change of IT systems. And I think I'll leave this graphic with you so that you can work through all of it. But I think you'll see right at the bottom at 17% soft factor, lack of motivation. So I think when you get to module 5 of this program, we're going to look at levels of engagement. We're going to look at commitment, the hierarchy of commitment, which will be part of this program, employee engagement, and also a hard factor, which is also one of the easily the top 10 challenges, is of course the technological barriers. I think this is probably the best known quote, which speaks to organizational culture, by the godfather of management gurus, Peter Drucker. And he's very famous for this quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." I think you could qualify that statement by saying every single day of the week. I think this just amplifies what the ProSci research is saying, in that corporate culture at 44% is the #1 challenge for implementing change effectively and successfully. Culture eats strategy for breakfast, Peter Drucker. When we look at the critical success factors, the most important aspects of successful change, again, right at the top of the list, we have top management sponsorship. And I don't think that's coincidental. I think you'll agree with me that most, if not all things, cannot happen at organizational level without top management support, without their sponsorship. And that seems to be the #1 critical success factor. #2 is a shared vision. #3, again, corporate culture that motivates and promotes change. I think that's very important. Again, so both the culture, but also top management, who are indeed the cultural carriers of change, they need to sponsor and promote change. These are easily in the top 3 of the most critical success factors. Honest and timely communication. Again, don't think we can underestimate the impact of communication. Again, there's that keyword ownership. So middle management, who are sometimes not the architects, because that is either the top or senior management, the executives, boards of directors, and sometimes working in collaboration with change management consultants. They tend to develop the blueprint, they have the vision, they set the change management objectives, and they of course have the vision for change. But of course, where the rubber meets the road, the most important at implementation level is of course middle management. And if middle management have not bought into and they do not support and own the change management process, then I think it's doomed to fail. Also, employee engagement involvement, again, I don't think we can overemphasize that, and I think we will discuss that in greater detail in Module 5. And of course, when we get to Module 2 and 3 in particular, we're going to look at the use of change agents. In particular, we're going to compare the value of internal versus external change agents, and probably the third option, of course, is a hybrid, to use a combination of both internal and external change agents. Now, what is quite significant about this research and this particular graph, again, if you look at the legend, it's color coordinated, and it's very clear that the soft factors of successful implementation of change far outweigh, far exceed the hard factors. The irony at organizational level is that we tend to fixate on the hard factors. Let's look at some of the examples of the hard factors. So it's the role, clarity, and structure, which is important, but I think maybe exaggerated. The skill set, training programs, performance measures, monetary, financial incentives, all of these are important, but according to the ProSci research, not as important as the soft factors. So I think the lesson here for a lot of change leaders, especially during a time of crisis, is that let's not amplify and exaggerate and fixate even on the hard factors. Let's build on the soft factors, like we said, top management sponsorship, shared vision, corporate culture, honest and timely communication, facilitating ownership, especially at the middle management level, and of course, unlocking this high level of employee engagement involvement from the general workforce. To summarize what ProSci was saying, with their various research, they set out to pinpoint the single most important aspect and then to differentiate why does some change succeed and other change fails. And I don't think it's surprising that the question to that research answer is the people side. It's people that will make or break your change management programs. Like we said in the ProSci research, the most critical success factors are the soft side, the softer issues, and of course, these sometimes are the power issues. And if we underestimate them, I think we are setting ourselves up for failure. So I think it's very clear from the global research thought leader that the soft side of change, the soft factors, the people side of change is probably the most pivotal. So let's look at various perspectives in terms of what are the factors that contribute to successful change. This is the model, and it gives us 5 factors. And I'm going to start at 9 o'clock and just go in a clockwise direction. And you'll see, like we will discuss in Module 2, active and committed leadership. Very important. There needs to be a clear business case and specific goals for change. We cannot overemphasize the importance of a proper feasibility study. And you'll see when we get to Module 3 in particular, when we start looking at the organizational change management processes, Cotter, Kurt Lewin, ProSci, all of these models suggest that prior to implementation, number one, there must be a proper feasibility study. There must be a clear, overwhelming, and compelling business case. So we know when we look at the business case, there are 3 factors that we need to consider. Number one, viability. Can the change work? Number 2, feasibility. Is change cost effective? Number 3, we need to make sure that change is sustainable. So the 3 questions: can it work? Is it cost effective? Can it last? Is it future proof? Sustainability is very important, and your feasibility study will give you this. Prior to implementation, once we've agreed that there is a compelling business case, we need to do what we call a force field analysis. Force field analysis will determine whether the driving forces for the implementation of change are greater than, they outweigh and exceed the resisting forces, the constraining forces. If that's not the case, then I think we need to go back to the drawing board and break down that potential resistance. Change, factor number 3, change must be embedded in operational processes, in strategies, if we don't embed the change, not align the change with our core business processes, our key business decisions, change must be embedded. It must be at the heartbeat of these organizational processes. We said it, ProSci, unanimous, employee participation. So just like we need top management support, we need ownership from middle management, we need the involvement, participation, engagement, and you'll see with Cotter's techniques in particular on how to break down resistance to change, and also with the different process models that the experts suggest. Consultation, education, very important. We have to create an awareness prior to the adoption and implementation of change processes. The social capital is very important. Factor number 5, we need to use these hidden business networks. So as change leaders, what we need to do, we need to look at the opinion leaders. We need to look at, excuse me, the people who are most influential. And we need to use that social capital to make sure that we win them over. And if we can win them over, we have to co-opt them. They need to become partners to the change management process. And if we can do that, then I think we certainly are paving the way towards effective and successful change. There's no guarantee of success, but I think this will enable us to facilitate a process of successful change. We said the soft factors are very important. The cornerstone of any business relationship is, of course, trust. And I like this model because it gives us the organizational trust equation. I love the work of Stephen Covey, and he talks about the emotional bank account, which is a metaphor for the amount of trust in any relationship. So top management, executive management, middle management, who are the implementers of change, have to build a relationship of trust with the employees, who will be the recipients, who will probably have the most impact of change. They will feel the pinch of change the most. We need to win them over. And of course, we need to get their commitment and their cooperation, etc. So what does this organizational trust equation say? Very basic calculation. There's 5 variables that we need to look at. So initially, we need to sum the aspirations, the abilities, the actions, and we need to multiply that by the sum of articulation. So articulation is how we articulate the change message, the voice of change, the vision, all of that, but also the alignment, the collaboration of the different change processes and systems, very important. So when we calculate the average of that, then we divide it by resistance to change. The only way to break down this resistance to change, and we're going to spend a lot of time when we get to module 2 of this particular program looking at how to break down resistance to change. We look at Cotter's techniques, 7 techniques, and as I said, education and awareness is very important, communication right at the front end of these strategies. This is the model that I alluded to earlier on. It's a model by Noster, Villa, and Thousand, and they suggest that there are 5 factors that lead to effective and successful change. And all 5 of these factors have to be clearly visible, have to be a very integral part of the change management process. And you'll see the top line of this model. Let's just run through it quickly. Number 1, there must be a clear vision for change. Like I started off this session with my quote, leaders need to articulate clarity and not confusion. So the change vision is very important, and it shouldn't, as I've alluded to, shouldn't just be a case of change for the sake of changing. There must be a clear and compelling business case for the value and the benefits of change. The benefits as seen by employees, the benefactors, they need to feel that it is worthwhile to implement the change. We mentioned the skills. Skills are very important. So change management, change leadership skills, resilience, we mentioned this, agility. These are the important skills for change to work. If we add the vision to the skills, there needs to be an incentive to change. So we need to reward people for the expected and required change behaviors. When people exhibit and we see that there is a real willingness to adopt these change functional behaviors, we need to incentivize, we need to reward people for those behaviors. We need resources. We said right at the top, along with organizational culture, the number two reason is, of course, a shortage of resources. So financial resources, human resources, material, especially technological resources, very important. And we need a blueprint. We need a very clear project plan, action plan, operational plan. And if all of those 5 factors, according to this model, are in place, that will lead to the outcome will be successful and effective change. The beauty of this model is they give us an indication in the absence of any one of these variables, what is the potential outcome. So let's just run through it line by line. So if we take out vision, if there's no clear and compelling vision that change leadership articulate, if you remove that from this equation, you have confusion. If you look at the third line, if we take out the skills, all 4 of the other factors and variables are present, but we take away skills, we subtract the skills, that leaves us with anxiety. So you'll see when we get through the different emotional and psychological states, the transition cycle that employees move through during times of change, the depression trough, which is the rock bottom, the lowest point of change, anxiety amplified. We need to guard against that. If we take away the incentives, this is where the walls of resistance are most significant. We have to incentivize change. Take away the incentives, you are just building, maybe inadvertently, you're building the walls of resistance to change. If you take away the resources, you have frustration, and you'll see I've given you an alternative illustration in the workbook, but if you take away the final factor, and that's the action plan, then you have false starts, or that particular model talks to the treadmill effect. So people feel that they are putting in a lot of energy, they are putting in a lot of effort, maybe even concerted effort, but in the absence of a clear blueprint and an action plan, you have false starts and a treadmill effect. And of course, this leads to extreme levels of failure. Like we've already said, 70% of change management programs do fail. So the key lesson from this is we need to have all 5 of these factors: the vision, the skills, the incentives, the resources, the action plan, all need to be there. And of course, if you don't have that, you are likely to have a combination of either confusion, anxiety, resistance, frustration, and the treadmill effect, a lot of false starts. So what are the pitfalls to avoid during organizational transformation, in particular when we find ourselves in a crisis? Well, number one, we said it repeatedly. If we neglect or ignore or dismiss the people dimension, the people side of change, again, it's a recipe for disaster. We need to thoroughly manage the expectations, especially as we move through the transition, the emotional, the psychological, the trough of despair, the trough of depression, which is the low point of change. If we don't navigate people through that and we don't understand and have insight into the expectations, I think it's, again, very concerning, and it could be an extreme red flag for change management and leadership. Number one, I said it earlier on, we cannot continue to operate in a business as usual kind of modality, change modality. It must be business unusual. And of course, the measures, the targets, the outcomes of change. We need to adapt those. Sometimes there's an over-reliance on centralized change management, and I think we need to ensure that we have a hybrid approach. We need to have a decentralized approach, and I think a good combination of both the internal expertise and understanding of the organizational culture blended with the insight and experience of external change consultants who have a tried and tested recipe of success. I think that gives the best change management results. Focus on pushing change instead of generating pull. So this leads us to the push versus the pull approach. We cannot push people. We're working with adults. Like we said with the Noster model, very important. We need to incentivize. We need to reward. We need to encourage. We need to consult. We need to win people over. Like we said with Aristotle's rhetorical triangle, we cannot just rely on rationality. We have to look at the ethos. We have to look at the logos. We have to look at the pathos. So don't just speak to people's heads. Win over their hearts, the pathos, but also we have to be a credible source. So the ethos, so the change leadership team, change management team have to be a very credible, a reliable source of the change vision and the change message. And we often use the credibility formula. Credibility equals integrity plus expertise. So your integrity and your expertise in a change management context, especially during a time of crisis, is very important. We shouldn't, number 6, we shouldn't pause for celebration and reflection. We have to make sure that Cotter's model, very useful here, is we have milestones. So when we achieve each of those milestones, we need to take the time and the effort to acknowledge those small wins, that success. Celebrate that success. If we don't celebrate that success, it's often in project management called the salami effect. So we need to slice up this change management project, the program, into bite-sized chunks. And once we've achieved each of those small wins, those milestones, we need to take time out, even if it's just a day from the project management plan, to make sure that we celebrate that success. And of course, number 7 is sometimes we lose focus on the customer while going through this particular transformation. So in human resources management, one of the global thought leaders, Dave Ulrich, and he talks about the outside-in perspective. So sometimes we get so caught up, we don't see the forest for the trees, and we fixate on the internal perspective, and we lose touch with our constituencies, our key stakeholders. And later on in this program, we're going to look at one of the key models that we need to look at, and that's, of course, the power interest matrix. So when we look at the power interest matrix, we can identify who these key stakeholders are. And for a lot of organizations, a lot of companies, your customer is your key stakeholder. So what are the characteristics of change-friendly and change-capable organizations? This is a very important outcome, the most important outcome 2 of Module 1. When we get to learning activity 2, I'd like you to use this as a yardstick against which you will measure your organizational state of readiness. The first factor that we need to look at, organizations through line of sight thinking need to link the present with the future. In other words, we need to do the SWOT analysis, for example, which is a snapshot of the status quo. We need to reconcile that with the desired end state. That's why, like we said in the various modules, that the change vision, the desired end goals, the outcomes are very important. And we need to show a clear pathway, a clear line of sight between where we are today and where we need to be. And of course, that's why the action plan, the blueprint is so important because it helps us to bridge the present to the future. The second factor is we need to become what we call a high impact learning organizational culture. With remote working cultures, we might argue that we need to become a virtual organizational learning organizational culture. But learning, like we said, must be embedded. It must be ingrained into the organizational culture. So what I would like you to do with learning activity 2 is, as we move through each of these 10 criteria on a 5 or even a 10-point scale, I'd like you to measure the current degree of compliance that your organization has with each of these factors. And then from this, I'd like you to do a gap analysis and to identify, of the 10, which are the 3 areas that are the most efficient, that are the most non-compliant. The third critical success factor is the active support and encouragement of day-to-day improvements and changes. So we spoke about this Kaizen, the Japanese philosophy, Tom Peters' quote about constant and incremental change, very important. We need to implement CIP, continuous improvement processes are very important. We need to look at our team structures. I think diversity is very important. We need to have this heterogeneous workforce, and of course, diversity, not just in terms of cultural or racial or gender diversity, so not just the geographic and demographic factors, but we also need to look at diversity from a multi-perspective, different thinking, different learning styles, different ideas. This creates a very important effect because it enables us to broaden our horizons and to come up with different perspectives and different ideas and different strategies. And this is all very constructive for change management best practice, in particular during a crisis. We need to be innovative. So we need to stimulate outside of the box thinking. I think this is very important. Whole brain thinking. Osborne and Partners spoke about this whole brain thinking process, which is an integration of the left and the right hemisphere of your brain. So typically the left hemisphere tends to be very analytical, tends to be very rational, but you need to start harnessing the right hemisphere of your brain, which tends to be more artistic, more intuitive, more creative. The sixth critical success factor is we need to protect and shelter breakthrough ideas. So we need to stimulate the intellectual capital. We need to safeguard the intellectual property of our organization. If we don't do this, I think it'll lead to compromising of the strategic competitive advantages that we've worked so hard up until this point to generate through our various strategies. Technology, we've repeatedly said, is at the heart of change. It's the catalyst, it's the #1 accelerator of change, and we need to use very sophisticated technology. We need to have integrated technology which we can implement in our core business processes, and technology through decision trees, for example, is very useful in terms of stimulating innovative thinking, also critical thinking. We spoke about the issue of trust. We looked at the trust equation earlier on. I spoke about Stephen Covey's emotional bank account. So we need to build and deepen the trust. So the capability, the integrity, the credibility, and of course the relationship. Those of you that are working in a very highly unionized working environment, very important that we win over the labor unions. The shop stewards, very important that we co-opt them as our agents of change. #9, we need to streamline and align our processes and systems and our structures. I think that's very important. We spoke about the alignment in the trust equation. We spoke about configuration, articulation. So efficiency is the very important outcome. So if we want our change to be effective, we must make sure that our change management processes are efficient. And the only way to enhance and to promote efficiency is to make sure there is this alignment between our processes, our systems, and our structures. And the 10th and final critical success factor of change-friendly and change-capable organizations is the leadership. Organizational leadership must have the will and conviction to change. If we don't have top management sponsorship, we saw it from the ProSci research, it's the #1 critical success factor. If we don't have the will, conviction, and the sponsorship of senior management, then change is doomed to fail. So as I've alluded to, I'd like you to tackle learning activity 2 at the end of this on-demand video clip. And again, similar to learning activity 1, if you could draft a 3 to 4 page essay where you respond to each of these 3 questions. I'll just brief you very quickly in each of these 3 questions, and then just send me an email. You'll see in the workbook and also in the SlideShare presentation on your screen right now, I've given you my email address. And I'd like you to use that as a basis of communication. And I'd like to monitor and track your progress as you implement these various strategies, these initiatives. And of course, hopefully, if there is success stories, I'd love you to share that with myself as the learning navigator. So question 2.1 deals with the characteristics of change-friendly capable organizations. I'd like you to use a 10-point scale, and I'd like you to measure the degree of compliance with each of those. I'd like you to then do some gap analysis where of the 10, identify 3 that you think are the most efficient, and I'd like you then to generate strategies on what you could do to mitigate or to counteract each of those 3 deficiencies. Question 2.2, I would like you to look at the different conditions for successful change. I've navigated you through that. I think it's very important that you look at the NOSTA model there. Like we said, the vision, the skills, the incentives, the resources, and also the action plan. So I'd like you to look at that. And also similar to question 2.1, I'd like you, of the 5, to identify the areas that need improvement. Like we said, if you want effective and successful change, all 5 of them must be at play at the same time. Missing any one of those variables, then it's doomed to be ineffective. So that's essentially 2.3, which is an integration of 2.1 and 2.2, where we can do a thorough gap analysis. So to keep things simple, maybe with the 10 characteristics and criteria of change-capable organizations, you could select 3, and with the NOSTA model, maybe 1 or 2 of the 5. And of course, all of this information you'll find in workbook 1. And like I said, please respond to these questions. So at this point, I'd like to summarize outcome 2 of module 1. Like we've discussed, there are 2 key outcomes that we've spent some time on. The first one is to look at the critical success factors of successful change. The precursor to that, of course, was to review some of the research, in particular, the research intelligence by ProSci, the global research thought leader with change, who alluded to the fact that only 30% of change management programs are successful. And they've given us some valuable research intelligence in unpacking what are the factors, the challenges and the factors, and particularly useful was the differentiation between the soft and the hard factors, and also the red flagging that sometimes we underestimate the soft factors and we over-exaggerate the hard factors. So I think an integrated approach is required, but don't underestimate the soft factors. The people side was the conclusion that they came to as the #1 factor that contributed to change management failure. So we looked at a couple of models, and of course the NOSTA model, where there's 5 factors that contribute to effective change. And in the absence of any one of those 5, you have a whole host of different challenges which could be extremely detrimental to the organization's change management track record. We also looked at the 10 criteria for change-friendly and change-capable organizations. And using those 2 models, I would like you to use it as a basis of initially benchmarking and doing the diagnosis and measurement, but then also to complete a gap analysis exercise. And then by means of an email, send me the essay, 3 to 4 page essay of each of those. So this brings module 1 to a conclusion. I will be sharing my contact details with you. So if you have any specific questions, please feel free to drop me an email. And I look forward to continuing this program with module 2 through to module 6. This is your Learning Navigator, Dr. Charles Cotter. I'm signing out. And like I said, I hope that you'll be joining me for the remainder of this on-demand learning program, modules 2 to module 6. Thank you.
This is Charles Cotter signing out. I'd like to thank you for watching the video clip, Change Management and Leadership in a Crisis online learning program. Please be on the lookout for subsequent uploads on my YouTube learning channel of the other modules. Also, please have a look at the chat box section. You'll see in the comment section. If you'd like to access a copy of the workbook in PDF format, I'll gladly email that to you for this specific module, but also the other modules of the various video clips. I'd also like to remind you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Please press the notification bell to be alerted of the subsequent uploads of the other modules, and also like to encourage you to reach out and contact me. My contact details and social media presence will be provided on the screen very shortly, so I'd encourage you to reach out. And of course, I would welcome any sort of communication or feedback regarding this video clip or any other learning content on my YouTube learning channel. Thank you. I appreciate your ongoing interest and active social media support. Thank you. You keep well. Bye-bye.